The wall of my room split open like water, and a stranger fell through it. I was halfway through my dinner, sitting on the edge of my bed with a bowl of noodles in my hands, when the air near my closet folded in on itself and tore. There was no warning, no sound before it happened. 1 second the wall was just a wall, and the next second there was a hole in it shaped like a doorway, glowing at the edges like hot metal, and a body was falling out of that hole and onto my floor. I dropped the bowl. It shattered somewhere near my foot, but I did not look down at it. I could not look away from what had just landed in my room. She was not human. That much was obvious in the first second. Her skin held a faint silver sheen under my lamp, like moonlight caught under a thin layer of glass. Her hair was a deep violet, braided with threads of metal that clicked softly as she moved. She wore a long coat of fabric I had never seen before, stitched with patterns that seemed to shift when I blinked, and around one leg was a brace made of dark metal, humming faintly, holding her upright in a way her own leg clearly could not. She looked up at me with wide eyes the color of a storm, and for one long moment neither of us said a word. Then she scrambled backward, pressing herself against the wall, breathing hard, her hand slamming against a device on her wrist. The glowing doorway behind her had already closed, sealed shut, gone. Whatever had brought her here was not going to take her back the same way. "Stay away," she said. Or at least, that is what the small device clipped near her collar told me, in a flat, mechanical voice, half a second behind her real one. Her real voice was something else entirely, low and musical, full of sounds my mouth could never make. "I did not mean to come here. I will fix this. Do not call anyone." I raised both hands slowly, the way you do when you meet a dog that might bite. "I'm not calling anyone," I said. "Nobody would believe me anyway." That seemed to surprise her more than the fact that I was calm. She stared at me like I had said something in a language she did not expect a human to know. Her hand was still pressed to the wrist device, fingers moving fast over symbols of light, but nothing happened. No new doorway opened. Whatever she was trying to do, it was not working. "It is not responding," she muttered, more to herself than to me. Her translator caught it and repeated it a half-second later, flat and toneless, stripped of the panic that was very clearly rising in her real voice. The relay burned out. That should not be possible. It should not be possible. I set down what was left of my noodles and knelt slowly, keeping my movements slow and easy, the way I would around anyone who looked cornered and afraid. "Hey," I said, "it's okay. Take a breath. Whatever that thing is, breaking it isn't the end of the world. We can figure something out." "You do not understand," she said, and there was an edge under the mechanical voice now, something sharp and tired at the same time. "If they find me here, in a room like this, with a human, unescorted, unprotected—" She stopped herself. Her jaw tightened. She looked down at the brace on her leg, like it had betrayed her, like it was the reason all of this had happened in the first place. I did not know what she meant by any of that yet. I did not know about empires or courts, or the weight that came with the word princess. All I knew, in that moment, was that a stranger from somewhere far beyond anything I understood was sitting on my floor, frightened, hurt in some way I could not fully see, and bracing herself for me to react badly. So I did not react badly. "What's your name?" I asked instead. She blinked at me. The device on her collar took a second longer than usual to catch up, like even it was confused by the question. "Zara," she finally said. "My name is Zara. I'm Aiden," I told her. "You're in my room, in a place called Earth, if that means anything to you, and you're safe here. Nobody is going to hurt you. You do not know that," she said quietly. "No," I admitted, "but I know I'm not going to hurt you. That's a start." She studied me for a long moment, her storm-colored eyes moving over my face like she was searching for the lie she expected to find there. I let her look. I did not move closer. I did not reach for my phone, even though every instinct in me was screaming that this was the biggest thing that had ever happened to anyone, ever, and I was the only person on the planet who knew about it. Instead, I reached for the small first aid kit I kept under my bed, because I had noticed the way she was sitting, favoring one side, her hand pressed lightly against her ribs where her coat had torn during the fall. "You're hurt," I said, holding up the kit so she could see it clearly before I moved any closer. "Can I help? I don't know anything about how your body works, so you'll have to tell me if I'm about to make things worse." For the first time since she had crashed into my life, something in her face shifted. It was not relief, not exactly. It was closer to disbelief. Like she had been ready for 100 different reactions from me, and comfort was not one of them. "You are not afraid," she said slowly, the translator working to keep pace with her. "Should I be? Most would be." "Most people haven't met you yet," I said, and I meant it as something small, something almost like a joke, but her eyes flickered in a way that told me it had landed somewhere deeper than I intended. She let me clean the shallow cut along her side, wincing once, her hand gripping the edge of my blanket hard enough that her knuckles paled to a lighter shade of silver. I worked slowly, careful, talking in a low voice about nothing important, the weather, the noise from the street outside, anything to keep the room from feeling as strange as it actually was. She did not answer most of it. She just watched me, like she was trying to solve a puzzle that refused to make sense. When I finished, she flexed her side carefully and let out a breath. "Your medicine is primitive," she said, and then immediately looked like she regretted the bluntness of it. "I mean no offense." "None taken," I said, smiling despite everything. "We do our best with what we've got." She almost smiled back. Almost. Then her eyes dropped to the brace on her leg, and the almost smile disappeared completely. "You are wondering about this," she said, before I could ask, before I even knew if I was going to ask. Her voice through the translator was flat, guarded, like she was reciting an explanation she had given 100 times before to people who had not asked for it kindly. "It does not work the way the rest of me does. It never healed the way it was supposed to. My body does not accept the same enhancements as everyone else in my line. I am told it is rare. I am told many things." There was something underneath those words, something old and worn smooth by repetition, like a stone that had been rubbed the same way for years until it no longer had any sharp edges left, only a dull ache where the edges used to be. I did not ask what enhancements meant, or what everyone else in my line meant. I did not ask about the coat, or the metal in her hair, or the doorway that had torn open in my wall like the world had a seam and she had fallen straight through it. All of that could wait. Right then, sitting on my floor with a stranger who flinched every time she thought I might look too closely at her leg, only one question actually mattered to me. "Does it hurt?" I asked. "Right now, I mean. Not the story behind it. Just, right now, are you in pain?" She looked at me like the question had never once been asked of her in exactly that order before. "A little," she admitted, so quietly the translator almost missed it. "Then let's deal with that first," I said. "Everything else can wait." I got up, careful and slow, and pulled a cushion off my chair, setting it gently behind her back so she could lean against something softer than the wall. I filled a glass with water from the small sink in the corner of my room and handed it to her, and she took it with both hands like she was not quite sure what to do with simple kindness offered without any strings attached. She drank in small, careful sips, watching me the entire time over the rim of the glass, as if waiting for the moment I would finally ask her to explain herself, to justify the hole in my wall, the metal in her leg, the fear still sitting behind her eyes. That moment did not come. I just sat back down across from her, keeping a respectful distance, and let the silence stretch out until it was no longer sharp, until it softened into something almost comfortable. "You are strange," Zara finally said. "I get that a lot," I told her, and this time, she actually laughed. It was short, surprised, like it had escaped her before she could stop it, but it was real, and it changed the entire shape of her face for a moment, chasing the fear back just far enough to let something lighter through. Outside, somewhere far beyond my window, beyond the sky I could see and the one I could not, alarms were already beginning to sound. Ships I did not know existed were already turning their sensors toward a small, quiet, unremarkable planet at the edge of a system nobody important had ever bothered to name. But in that room, for just a little while longer, there was only a girl who did not know how to be comforted, and a boy who did not know how not to try. "Whatever happens next," I said, watching her fingers tighten slightly around the glass, "you don't have to go through it pretending you're fine when you're not. Not in this room. Not with me." She did not answer right away. She just looked at me for a long moment, storm-colored eyes searching my face one more time, like she was checking to see if the offer was real. It was. And somewhere behind that quiet, careful look, something in her that had been braced and guarded for a very long time began, just slightly, to loosen. Zara did not sleep. Not really. She sat against the cushion I had given her, knees drawn up, watching the door of my room like it might split open again at any second and swallow her whole. I stayed awake with her, not because I thought I needed to guard anything, but because it felt wrong to leave someone alone with fear that heavy sitting on their chest. Somewhere around the middle of the night, when the streetlights outside had dimmed and the building had gone quiet, she finally spoke again, and this time she did not wait for me to ask. "Where I come from," she said, staring at the brace on her leg rather than at me. "No one is broken. That is the first thing they teach you. No one is broken, because everyone is corrected. Every child, when they come of age, receives the enhancement. It repairs what nature left unfinished. It strengthens what was weak. It makes us equal to the empire we serve." Her translator caught every word cleanly this time, like the device itself had gotten used to the shape of her voice, or maybe I had simply gotten used to listening past the half-second delay. "And yours didn't work," I said carefully. "Mine rejected it," she corrected, and there was a bitterness in the correction, small but unmistakable, like a splinter under the skin of the sentence. "My body fought against the very thing meant to save it. The healers called it a flaw in my blood, a defect passed down through no fault of my own, and yet somehow still my burden to carry." I did not say anything right away. I had learned enough about people, even human ones, to know that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is simply let someone finish. I was 6 years old the first time a physician looked at my leg and told my mother I would never walk without help, Zara continued. I was 7 when I learned to stop crying about it in front of others, because crying only made the pity in their eyes grow louder. I was 10 when I understood that pity and respect can look almost the same from a distance, but up close, they feel nothing alike. Her hand drifted down to the brace, resting there, not with affection, but with the tired familiarity of someone touching something they have carried for so long it has become an extension of their own body, whether they wanted it to or not. "In the court," she said, "everyone smiles at me. Everyone bows. Everyone calls me princess, with careful, gentle voices, as though I might shatter if they spoke too loudly. And every single one of them believes, somewhere underneath all that gentleness, that I am not truly fit to inherit what my bloodline promises me. They do not say it. They do not have to. I have spent my whole life learning to hear the things people do not say." I thought about that for a moment, turning it over slowly in my mind before I spoke, because it felt important not to answer too quickly, not to hand her some easy comfort just to fill the silence. "That sounds exhausting," I finally said, "being surrounded by people every day and still feeling completely alone in the room." Zara looked up at me then, sharp and sudden, like I had touched something she had never expected a stranger to find so easily. "Yes," she said, quiet and almost startled by her own agreement. "That is exactly what it is." "For what it's worth," I said, "I don't think there's anything wrong with you. I think there's something wrong with how they've been looking at you." She let out a breath that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh, something caught between the two. "You say that so easily, as if it costs you nothing to believe it." "Maybe it doesn't," I said. "I didn't grow up around empires or thrones or enhancements. Where I'm from, everybody's missing something. Some people can't hear well. Some people can't hear well. Some people's legs don't work the way they're supposed to, and some people's minds work in ways nobody else quite understands. Nobody I know got handed a body that came with a guarantee. We just figure out how to live in the ones we've got. That sounds chaotic, Zara said, but there was no real judgment in it, just curiosity, the kind that came from someone encountering an idea for the very first time. It is chaotic, I agreed, smiling slightly. But at least it's honest. Nobody pretends we're all built the same, so nobody has to pretend you're broken just because your body decided to do its own thing. Zara was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than before, less guarded, less braced for impact. She studied the metal brace on her leg for a long moment, and then, almost experimentally, she flexed her fingers against it, tapping the surface once, twice, like she was noticing it in a new way. "You survived it," I added, before I fully knew I was going to say it. "Your whole life, people telling you what you can't do, what you're not fit for, what's wrong with you, and you're still here, still sharp, still asking questions instead of just accepting what they told you to believe. That's not weakness. That's data. That's proof you're a lot stronger than any of them gave you credit for." The words hung there in the small, quiet room, simple as anything, and yet I watched them land on her like nothing else had all night. Her lips parted slightly, her storm-colored eyes shone with something she did not immediately blink away. "No one has ever said it to me like that," she said softly. "Not once. Not in all my life." "Well," I said, shrugging a little, trying to keep the moment from feeling too heavy, because I could tell she needed room to breathe inside it, not more weight pressing down. "Now someone has." She was quiet for a long moment, and then, unexpectedly, she reached over and picked up the empty glass I had given her earlier, turning it slowly in her hands like it was something worth examining. "Everyone in my life until tonight has tried to fix me," she said. "Or hide me, or explain me away to visiting dignitaries before I have the chance to explain myself. You have done none of those things. You have simply spoken to me. It is a very small thing. I do not understand why it feels so large." "Maybe because it shouldn't be rare," I said, "but somewhere along the way, somebody convinced you it was too much to ask for." Zara set the glass down carefully, like she was setting down something far heavier than empty glass. "My people believe perfection is the highest form of respect we can offer the Empire," she said. "Every enhancement, every correction, every erased flaw is meant to prove our worth." I was raised believing that too, even as my own body refused to fit inside that belief. I have spent years trying to prove I deserved my place despite what I lack, rather than simply existing as I am and calling that enough. "What would it take," I asked slowly, "for you to believe it was enough? Just as you are, brace and all?" She did not answer right away. She looked down at her hands, then at the brace, then finally back up at me, and there was something new in her expression now, something fragile and cautious, like a door that had been shut for so long it had forgotten it was allowed to open. "I do not know," she admitted. "I have never truly let myself wonder." "Well," I said gently, "you've got time now. Might as well start wondering." Outside my window, the sky had not yet begun to lighten, but somewhere far above the clouds, something had already changed. A search pattern had been set into motion. A missing signature had been flagged. Ships that answered to no government on Earth were beginning to quietly, carefully, adjust their course. Zara did not know it yet, not exactly, but some part of her sensed it all the same, the way a person can sense a storm long before the first raindrop falls. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the sealed, ordinary wall where the doorway had once torn open, and for just a moment, the fear crept back into the edges of her face. "They will come for me," she said quietly. "Eventually, when my signature reappears on their monitors, they will find this place. They will find you, and when they do, everything I have said tonight, every quiet thing I have allowed myself to feel in this room, will not matter to them at all. To my escort, I am not a person who deserves gentleness. I am an asset that has gone missing and must be recovered before the scandal spreads." "Then let them come," I said, and I was surprised by how steady my own voice sounded, considering I had absolutely no idea what I was agreeing to. "You don't have to go back to pretending the second they walk through that door. Whatever happens next, you get to decide how you want to face it. Not them. You." Zara looked at me for a long moment, and something in her posture shifted, just slightly, straightening rather than curling inward the way it had all night. It was not confidence, not fully, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that had not been allowed to grow in her for a very long time. "You are either the bravest human I have ever met," she said softly, "or the most foolish." "Probably both," I admitted, and this time, when she laughed, it did not sound surprised at all. It sounded, for the first time since she had fallen through my wall, like it belonged to her completely. The wrist device on Zara's arm let out a sharp, sudden chime just before dawn, and she flinched so hard she nearly knocked over the glass beside her. "They have found the signature," she said, staring at the small glowing symbols scrolling across her skin. Her voice, even through the flat translation, had gone tight and fast. The relay burned out, but it still left a trace. A weak one. It should not have been enough to track. It should not have been possible so quickly. "How much time do we have?" I asked, already on my feet, though I had no plan, no idea what preparing for alien soldiers was even supposed to look like. "Hours, perhaps," she said. "Perhaps less. My escort will not simply knock on a door and ask politely. If they believe I was taken against my will, they will search this entire structure. If they believe I left on my own, they will be angrier still, because that means someone will have to explain to the court why the crown princess was allowed to vanish under their watch." "Wait," I said, the word crown princess finally landing with its full weight. "You're not just a princess. You're next in line." Zara gave a small, humorless smile. "I am the heir to the Vantrell Empire, Aiden. Whether I am fit to hold that title is a debate that has followed me since the day my leg first failed to heal on its own. Tonight, I intended only to disappear for a few hours. To walk somewhere, anywhere, without an escort watching every step I took, without advisors correcting my posture, without physicians examining me like a specimen that had not yet been properly catalogued. I chose the oldest, most unstable relay in the archive, specifically because no one would think to monitor it. I did not expect it to fail. I did not expect to fall through a hole in the world and land in front of the one person in the galaxy who would actually speak to me like I mattered. "So this wasn't an accident," I said slowly. "Not entirely." "The failure was an accident," she said. "The leaving was not." I sat back down across from her, trying to process everything at once. The Empire, the throne, the guards who were surely already scanning the skies of a planet that had no idea any of this was happening. "Okay," I said, "so what happens when they find you? What actually happens? Not the version you're scared of, the real version." Zara drew in a slow breath. "Officially, I will be recovered, examined for injury, and returned to the palace under heavier guard than before. Unofficially, this will be treated as proof that I cannot be trusted to manage my own protection, let alone an empire. There are cousins in my line who have wanted my place for years. They will use this. They will say the flaw in my body has finally shown itself in my judgment as well." "That's not fair," I said. "Fairness has never been a requirement of court politics," Zara replied, and there was an old, tired weight behind the words, the weight of someone who had learned that lesson far too young. I thought about it for a moment, and then I asked the question that had been sitting quietly at the back of my mind since the moment she fell through my wall. "What do you actually want, Zara? Not what your empire wants, not what your cousins want. You." She looked at me like the question had physically startled her, like no one had ever bothered to separate those things before, and hand the answer back to her alone. "I want to be trusted," she said finally, slowly, like she was discovering the shape of the words as she spoke them. "Not despite my leg, not in spite of my blood. I want someone, anyone, in a position of power to look at me and see capability, instead of a problem to be managed. I have wanted that for so long, I had almost stopped letting myself say it out loud. Then let's figure out how to get you that, I said. Not by hiding, by facing them. You do not understand Imperial Guards, Zara said, some of the old fear creeping back into her voice. They are not cruel by nature, most of them, but they are trained to see this exactly as a failure to be corrected quickly and quietly. They will not care what either of us wants. They will care about restoring order before anyone important notices it was ever broken. Then we make sure someone important notices, I said, an idea beginning to take shape, rough and unfinished but real. If this whole thing gets buried quietly, nothing changes. You go back to being managed instead of trusted. But if it happens in the open, if people actually see what tonight was really about, maybe it's harder to sweep under the rug. Zara stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the fear and the flicker of something braver waging a quiet war behind her eyes. That is a very dangerous idea, she said. Most good ones are, I said, and I meant it as reassurance, though I was fairly certain I had no idea what I was actually promising. We spent the next stretch of hours doing what little we could to prepare, though preparing for an Imperial search team with nothing but a first aid kit and a broken wrist device felt a little like trying to stop the tide with a bucket. Zara explained what she could about her people while we waited, her voice steadying the longer she spoke, like the simple act of being listened to was slowly rebuilding something in her that years of court life had worn thin. She told me about the Vantrell Empire, vast and old, stretched across more star systems than I could hold in my head at once, built on a foundation of order, precision, and the belief that flaws, once identified, should always be corrected. She told me about the enhancement ceremony every child underwent, a rite of passage meant to erase weakness and prepare a body for a lifetime of service to something larger than itself. She told me, quietly, about the day her own ceremony had gone wrong, how the enhancement had rejected her body instead of repairing it, how her parents had stood in stiff, careful silence while healers debated what to do with a princess who did not fit the mold her bloodline required. They never told me I was unwanted, Zara said. They simply stopped mentioning me in certain rooms. It is a very quiet kind of exclusion, easy to overlook if you are not the one living inside it. I think you underestimate how loud quiet things can get, I said, once someone finally points them out. She almost smiled at that, and for a moment, the fear in the room eased just slightly, replaced by something steadier, something that looked a great deal like resolve. It was near midday, sunlight cutting harsh lines across my floor, when the first sign of them arrived. Not a knock, not a warning. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, sharply, and the wall where the original doorway had torn open began to glow again, faint at first, then bright, then unmistakable. Zara went rigid beside me. "They are here," she whispered. I stood, placing myself slightly, instinctively, between her and the wall, though I had no illusions about what good that would actually do against whatever was about to step through it. "Whatever happens," I said, glancing back at her, "you don't shrink. Not this time. You stand exactly as tall as you actually are." Zara pushed herself up from the cushion, using the brace on her leg without flinching, without apologizing for the sound it made as it locked into place. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and for the first time since she had fallen into my life, she looked less like a girl bracing for judgment, and more like someone preparing to meet it head-on. The doorway tore open fully, and the light poured through, and beyond it, I could see the shapes of armored figures beginning to step forward, their weapons drawn, their voices sharp and clipped, in a language I did not understand, aimed directly at the small, ordinary room that had somehow become the center of an empire's attention. Zara did not step back. Neither did I. 3 armored figures stepped through the torn seam in my wall, weapons raised, boots striking my floor like the room itself belonged to them now. Behind them, filling the space beyond the doorway, I caught a glimpse of something enormous hanging in the sky above my building, a shape too large and too smooth to belong to anything human-made, its hull catching the midday sun like polished stone. The lead figure lowered his weapon the instant his visor found Zera, and behind the dark glass, I saw something flicker, relief, maybe, or the particular kind of tension that comes from a job nearly failed and suddenly saved. His voice, sharp and commanding, rattled off something in that same clipped language, and Zera's translator caught the edges of it and turned it into words I could understand a half-second later. "Your Highness, you are unharmed. We feared the worst when the relay signature vanished." "I am unharmed, Captain Voss," Zera answered, her own voice steady, steadier than I had heard it all night. "No thanks to the relay you allowed to remain active in the archive despite its age." The captain's posture stiffened slightly at that, and behind him, the other two guards shifted their weapons toward me instead, the barrels tracking my movement the moment I took half a step closer to Zera. "Stand down," Zera said sharply, before I could even react. "He is not a threat. He is the reason I am alive to be recovered at all." The captain's visor turned toward me, and I felt the full weight of being examined by someone who very clearly considered me an inconvenience at best. "A primitive," he said, the word landing through the translator with obvious distaste. "Your Highness, protocol requires immediate extraction. Explanations can be given to the Council once you are secured aboard the vessel." "Protocol," Zera repeated, and there was an edge in her voice now that had not been there before, something sharpened rather than softened by fear. "Tell me, Captain, does protocol account for what happens after extraction? Does it account for the healers who will examine me not for injury, but for evidence of poor judgment? Does it account for the council members already drafting statements about how this proves I am unfit to rule?" The captain hesitated, just slightly, and I could see it cost him something to admit it. "That is not my concern, Your Highness. My concern is your safety." "Then let me tell you what happened to my safety in the hours before you arrived," Zera said, and she turned, deliberately, to face me rather than him, as though she wanted every word that followed to be witnessed rather than simply reported. "I fell through a broken relay into the room of a stranger on an unlisted planet, a stranger with no obligation to help me, no reason to trust me, and no knowledge of who I was. And in the hours that followed, that stranger did not once ask what use I could be to him. He did not examine my leg like a specimen. He did not lower his voice the way physicians do when they believe a person is too fragile to hear the truth about their own body. He simply spoke to me, Captain, as though I were a person and not a problem waiting to be solved." The two guards behind Voss exchanged a brief, uncertain glance, weapons lowering slightly, though neither seemed willing to be the first to stand fully at ease. "Your Highness," Voss said carefully, "the Council will not see it that way." "I am aware," Zera said, "which is precisely why I intend to make certain they hear it directly from me, rather than through whatever quiet, convenient version of events someone else is already preparing to tell them." I watched her stand there, brace locked firmly beneath her, chin lifted, voice unwavering, and it was hard to reconcile this version of her with the frightened girl who had crashed through my wall only hours before. She had not changed overnight. She had simply been given, maybe for the first time, room to be exactly what she already was. "Your Highness," Voss tried again, his tone shifting, less commanding now, closer to something almost pleading. "Please, whatever grievance you carry against the Council, this is not the place to air it. Return with us now. We can discuss all of this once you are safely aboard." "No," Zera said simply, and the single word landed with more weight than anything else she had said all night. The captain's visor turned toward me again, and this time there was something colder in the set of his shoulders. "You have influenced her," he said, and it was not quite an accusation, but it was close. "Whatever you have said to her in this room, human, you will answer for it before the Council decides what to do with you." Something in me went very still, and I realized, distantly, that I was afraid, properly afraid, for the first time since Zera had fallen through my wall. Not for myself exactly, though that fear was there too, quiet and reasonable. Mostly, I was afraid for her, afraid that everything fragile and new that had grown in that small room overnight would be crushed the moment she was pulled back into a world built to smooth her down into something more convenient. I didn't influence her to think anything, I said, keeping my voice level even as my heart hammered against my ribs. I just didn't treat her like something broken. That's not influence. That's the bare minimum. The fact that it's different from what she gets from her own people isn't my failure. It's yours. Voss's jaw tightened visibly, even through the visor, the shape of his frustration unmistakable. You do not understand our ways. No, I agreed, I don't. But I understand people, and I understand that when someone spends their whole life being managed instead of respected, eventually they stop believing they deserve respect at all. That's not a flaw in her. That's a flaw in every single person who decided her leg mattered more than her mind. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than sound, and for a long moment, nobody moved. Zara's eyes were fixed on me, wide, something bright and startled behind them, like she had not expected me to say any of that out loud, especially not to armed men from her own empire. Then, unexpectedly, one of the two guards behind Voss lowered his weapon fully, stepping back half a pace, and spoke, quiet enough that his voice barely reached the translator at all. "Captain," he said, "perhaps we should hear her out, fully, before we decide anything." Voss turned sharply toward him, clearly startled by the interruption, but he did not immediately silence it, which told me more about the shifting mood in that room than anything else could have. Zara seized the opening. "I am not asking to be excused from my duties, Captain," she said, her voice steady, clear, carrying the kind of authority that did not need to be shouted to be heard. "I am asking to be trusted with them. There is a difference, and it is a difference the Council has never once bothered to learn. I want physicians who examine my condition without treating it as a verdict on my character. I want advisors who consult me instead of managing around me. I want the Empire to understand that a body which required no correction is not automatically superior to one that simply learned, on its own, how to endure." Her hand drifted briefly to the brace on her leg, and this time there was no flinch in the movement, no apology hidden in the gesture. She touched it the way someone touches a tool they have mastered, not a wound they are ashamed of. "You survived a system built to convince you that you were incomplete," I added quietly, meeting her eyes across the room. "That's not something to hide from a council. That's something to walk in and show them." Zara held my gaze for a long moment, something steadying visibly behind her expression, and then she turned back to Captain Voss, standing taller than I had seen her stand all night. "I will return with you, Captain," she said, "not because protocol demands it, because I choose to, and when I stand before the Council, I will tell them exactly what happened here, in full, without softening a single part of it for their comfort." Voss studied her for a long moment, and something in his posture finally eased, not fully, but enough. "As you wish, Your Highness," he said, and though his voice remained formal, there was something different threaded through it now, something that had not been there when he first stepped through the wall. Respect, maybe, or at least the beginning of it. Zara turned to me one last time before the guards moved to escort her toward the glowing seam in the wall. "Thank you, Aiden," she said, and her translator caught the words cleanly, but I did not need it to understand the weight behind them. "For not treating tonight like an emergency to be managed, for treating me like someone worth listening to." "You were always worth listening to," I said. "It just took the right room for someone to finally do it." She smiled then, small and real, and for a moment, the fear that had followed her through my wall hours earlier was nowhere in sight. "This is not goodbye," she said. "I intend to return, on my own terms, through a door that does not require an accident to open." "I'll be here," I told her. The captain gestured toward the seam, and Zara walked toward it without hesitation, brace locking steadily beneath her with every step, chin lifted, shoulders squared, carrying herself like someone who had finally remembered exactly what she was worth. The light swallowed her, and the wall sealed shut behind her, leaving my room exactly as ordinary as it had been the night before, except for the faint, lingering warmth in the air, where something impossible had just happened, and the quiet certainty settling in my chest that this was very far from over. The story should have ended there, quietly, the way most impossible nights fold themselves back into ordinary mornings and are never spoken of again. It did not end there. 3 weeks later, my wall tore open for the second time in my life, and this time, there was no panic in the light that spilled through it. Zara stepped into my room on her own 2 feet, brace locked firmly beneath her, no guards flanking her sides, no fear in the set of her shoulders. She looked different, not physically, but in the way a person looks different once something long carried has finally been set down. "You came through the door," I said, because it was the first thing I could think to say, and because it mattered more than it probably should have. "I told you I would," she said, smiling. "Though I admit, I asked the engineers to make certain this particular relay would not burn out halfway through." She sat, not on the floor this time, but in the chair across from my bed, the same chair I had once pulled a cushion from for her, and she told me everything that had happened since the guards led her away. The council had not received her return warmly, not at first. There had been long, uncomfortable hearings, questions about judgment, about safety, about whether a princess who could vanish through an unstable relay should be trusted with the greater instability of an empire. Zara had answered every question herself, without an advisor softening her words, without a physician standing beside her to explain her condition on her behalf. She had told them, plainly, what the enhancement ceremony had done to her as a child, what years of quiet exclusion had cost her, and what it had taken, finally, for someone with no stake in imperial politics to simply speak to her like a person instead of a liability. "There was a long silence after I finished," Zara told me, turning the small glass I handed her slowly in her hands. An old habit now, one I recognized fondly. I believed, in that moment, that I had ruined everything, that I had handed my cousins exactly the evidence they needed. "What happened?" I asked. "An older councilwoman stood first," Zara said. "She has sat on the council longer than my mother has been alive. She said that in all her years of service, she had never once heard an heir speak so plainly about what the Empire's pursuit of perfection had cost its own people. She said perhaps it was time the council listened to that cost, rather than continuing to bury it beneath careful language and quiet exclusion." Word of the hearing had not stayed contained within the council chamber. It had spread, first through the palace, then through the wider court, and eventually, through channels far beyond anything either of us could have predicted, into the broader gossip networks of the empire itself. The story of the crown princess, who had stood before the council and refused to apologize for a body that had never once needed correcting to be worthy, became, slowly, something people repeated to each other with a kind of quiet hope attached to it. "There are others like me," Zara said. "More than the empire has ever openly admitted. Children born with bodies that reject the enhancement, or minds that process the galaxy differently than the standard ceremony expects, or conditions that have no correction at all, only accommodation. For generations, they have been hidden, managed, spoken about only in careful, private rooms. I intend to change that." She told me about the reforms already being drafted, slow and imperfect, but real. New protocols for physicians, requiring them to consult patients rather than simply correct them. New training for advisors, focused on trust rather than management. A formal acknowledgement, still being debated word by word, that an unenhanced body was not a lesser one, only a different one, and that the Empire's obsession with erasing difference had cost it more than it had ever gained. "It will take years," Zara admitted. "Perhaps longer than I have left to live, depending on how carefully my cousins continue to plot against me." She said it lightly, but there was steel underneath the humor, the steel of someone who no longer intended to shrink from a fight, simply because it might be difficult. "You didn't have to do any of that," I said. "You could have gone back, said what they wanted to hear, and let everything stay exactly the same." "I could have," Zara agreed. "I very nearly did, in the moments before the hearing began. And then I remembered something someone told me, in a small room on a planet no one in my empire had ever bothered to name, that I had survived a system built to convince me I was incomplete, and that surviving it was not weakness. It was proof. I felt something tighten in my chest, warm and unexpected. I can't believe that actually stuck with you. It stuck with me, Zara said quietly, because it was the first true thing anyone had ever said about me without asking for something in return. We sat together for a long while after that, talking about smaller things, easier things, the kind of conversation two people have when the weight between them has finally settled into something steady rather than something fragile. She asked about my life, about Earth, about the strange, chaotic honesty of a species that had never once pretended everyone was built the same. I asked about her empire, about the stars I would never see with my own eyes, about the strange, sprawling weight of a throne she was slowly learning to carry on her own terms rather than the ones handed to her. Before she left, she paused at the seam in the wall, the doorway glowing softly, patient this time instead of desperate. "I will not vanish again," she said. "Not the way I did before, but I would like to return, if that is something you would welcome." "It's always something I'd welcome," I told her, and I meant it completely. She smiled, and for a moment, the weight of an entire empire seemed to fall away from her shoulders entirely, leaving only a girl standing a little taller than she used to, brace steady beneath her, chin lifted, unashamed. "There is a saying among my people about doors," she said, glancing back at me one last time before stepping toward the light, "that the ones we are dragged through mean nothing. Only the ones we choose to walk through ourselves carry any weight at all." "Sounds like a good saying," I said. "It is," she agreed. "I only just learned to believe it." The doorway closed behind her, quiet and steady, no panic left in its glow, and my room settled back into its ordinary shape once more. But it did not feel ordinary anymore, not really, not after everything that had passed through it. Somewhere far above the sky I could see, an empire was slowly, carefully, beginning to change its shape around one girl who had finally stopped apologizing for the one she had always been. And in a small, unremarkable room, on a small, unremarkable planet that no empire had ever thought worth naming, a door remained open, waiting patiently for the next time she chose, on her own terms, to walk through it.